Auxiliary verbs. Auxiliary verbs are used in different forms to help express a verb tense, mood, or voice. They are sometimes called helping verbs, and they usually appear before the base form of the main verb in statements and at the start of sentences in questions. They include forms of the verb be, such as am, is, are, was, were, being, been. Have, has, having, had. For example, he has lived in New York City for 10 years. In this sentence, has is the auxiliary verb and lived is the main verb. Common auxiliary verbs: do, does, did. These are typically used in questions or negative statements. For example, he doesn't like pizza. Does not or doesn't is the auxiliary verb and like is the main verb. Another example is, did your mother play the piano as a child? Did is the auxiliary verb and play is the main verb. Modal verbs: can, could, will, would, should, may, might, must, and shall. We should visit that museum tomorrow. Should is the modal verb and visit is the main verb. Modal verbs. Modal verbs serve many functions in English and have varying degrees of formality. The most common functions are requests, permission, necessity, advisability and/or expectation, and possibility. Modal verbs that are requests may be can, could, may, and might. Modal verbs that are permission are can, could, would, and may. Modal verbs that serve the function of necessity include must and have to. Modal verbs that serve the function of advisability and/or expectation include should and ought to. And finally, for possibility, the modal verbs are may, might, could, should, ought to, must, and will. Here's the structure of modal verbs in sentences: subject plus modal verb plus base form of verb. For example, Maria should go. Or, in the form of a question, it would be the modal verb plus the subject plus the base verb and the question. For example, should Maria go? Modal verbs examples in context. Here are some famous quotes using modal verbs. If you can dream it, you can do it. Walt Disney. Can and can are both modal verbs in this sentence. If there were no bad people, there would be no good lawyers. Charles Dickens. Would is the modal verb in this quote. It is never too late to be what you might have been. George Eliot. Might have are the modal verbs in this sentence. It is in our darkest moments that we must focus to see the light. Aristotle. Must is the modal verb in this quote.